In this video, we'll be going over IRS Form 8919, Uncollected Social Security and Medicare Tax on Wages. So, you would complete this form and submit it with your income tax return under the following conditions, and all of these have to apply to your situation. A, you perform services for a firm. B, you believe that your pay from the firm was not for services as an independent contractor. So we'll talk about the difference between employee versus independent contractor in just a moment. C, the firm did not withhold your share of Social Security and Medicare taxes from your pay. And finally, one of these applicable reason codes applies to your situation. So, before we get into the reason codes, let's talk about the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. So for Social Security and Medicare tax purposes, an employee of a firm normally will have what's known as FICA, which is the Federal Insurance Contribution Act. That constitutes Social Security and Medicare. Generally speaking, the employee's salary is deducted 6.2% of the amount of their earned income up to an annual limit. That limit is known as the Social Security wage base limit. So I'm going to transition from this really quickly to a page on the Social Security website where we can see the benefit, the wage base amount for each year, because it is pegged to inflation figures. The Social Security trustees recalculate the wage base limitation each year. For example, in 2024, that amount was $168,600, which means that any employee would have their pay deducted on their side 6.2% of up to $168,600. After that, they can earn as much as they want, but that would be they would not contribute any more to Social Security. That does impact their earnings. It would also impact money coming out of their check. So someone making $200,000 would contribute the same as someone that's making $168,600. In 2025, that amount went up to $176,100. And as of the time of this recording, the 2026 projections haven't come out, but they're expected to be somewhere around $186,000. So, and then Medicare, it's 1.45%. There's no limit on that. There's no Medicare wage base. So that's what employees pay. As an independent, what many employees don't realize is that employers also pay the exact amount on the other end of the ledger. So for every dollar that you contribute as an employee, your employer, unbeknownst to you, is contributing the same amount to Social Security. So if you saw that your FICA taxes were $5,000 in a year, your employer also paid $5,000 of FICA taxes. So the difference between an employee and an independent contractor is that the independent contractor wears both hats. They are, for intents and purposes, considered to be their own employer. As a result, the independent contractor must pay the employer's share and the employee's share of both Social Security and Medicare wages. So if your combined amount for Social Security and Medicare represents about 7.65% of your net of your gross pay, then as an independent contractor, your net out of pocket for the same coverage would be 15.3%. As a result, there's usually a debate in a lot of situations between companies that choose to select their workforce as independent contractors and push that bill onto them versus people who believe that they should be treated as an employee. So the IRS has a process where the IRS will make a determination for tax purposes whether or not someone's considered to be a W-2 employee or a 1099 contractor. And so you can go through that process and the reason codes apply. So a reason code would be a reason that you believe you should be treated as an employee and not as an independent contractor. So basically, reason A is you filed a Form SS-8, which is the letter of the request for a determination, and you received a determination letter saying that you are indeed an employee of the firm. Reason code C indicates that you received other correspondence from the IRS saying that you're an employee. So maybe you didn't file a Form SS-8, but you received some other letters from the IRS saying that you are a W-2 employee and not a 1099 contractor. Reason code G would mean that you filed the Form SS-8 with the IRS, but you haven't received a reply back. And then reason H is you received a Form W-2 and a 1099 from this firm for the tax year, and the amount that was reported on a 1099 should have been included as wages on the Form W-2. So we're going to complete this as if we're John Doe, and we're telling the IRS that we're reporting uncollected Social Security and Medicare tax on wages. And if you don't file this form, then basically you're on the hook for that missing 7.65%. So that's the deal. If your W-2 shows that you only paid 7.65, well, if you received a W-2, this shouldn't be a conversation. But if you received a 1099, and you would be responsible for either the 15.3%, or if you're wondering why you didn't get a W-2 and you're still in the middle of that discussion, this is your way to be able to say, I am not responsible for these taxes because we're still working through this, or the IRS has already determined that I'm not responsible. So let's just say he's an employee of Acme Enterprises, and their federal identification number, their employer ID number, and let's just say that he did file a Form SS-8. He got an IRS determination saying that he is an employee of the firm. Let's just say that he received it at the beginning of, we're doing this for the 2024 tax year. It's an update from the 2022 video that we did. Virtually zero change other than the wage-based limit for Social Security calculations. So we'll get to that in just a moment. So you can check here if you received a 1099, and then you'll report the total wages that you received with no Medicare or Social Security tax withheld or not reported on a W-2. So let's just say that he didn't receive a 1099, but he received $100,000 of wages, and it looks like none of that was withheld. So if you had multiple firms, you would total all of these amounts. We're simply going to enter that here. And then that would also be on line 1G of your IRS Form 1040. There is a separate line to report wages from that were not reported on your W-2. So if you see wages that were reported on your W-2, don't report those same wages on line 1G. That's double counting your income. So most likely you would have received a 1099. So you're going to put this in here. And again, don't enter this if you know that you received $100,000 in wages and for some reason there's a W-2. Don't put that in here as well. So the maximum amount of wages subject to Social Security tax. Oh, sorry. One last thing before we move forward. So if none of these reason codes apply to you, but you think you should have been treated as an employee, then you can select form reason code G, file the form SS8 separately, and then just say that you haven't received a reply yet. That's literally written in the instruction right here. That's completely legitimate. So let's talk about the total amount of Social Security wages and tips. So that would be the total amount that was reported on your W-2. And I'm going to read an excerpt from the instructions just to make sure we cover all the bases. So if you're a railroad employee, they have a similar system. It's basically a parallel system to Social Security called the Railroad RRTA for Railroad Retirement Compensation. Don't include an amount greater than the Social Security wage base. They're parallel systems, but they're virtually identical in the amounts of income. So let's just say that none of this was reported on a W-2. And now we're going to subtract line 8 from line 7. That's 168,600. And then we're going to enter the smaller of either line 6 or line 9. This is the amount that would be subject to Social Security. We're going to multiply this amount by 6.2%. And then we're going to multiply the line 6 amount, so it doesn't matter if, so the line 6 amount has no limit, so we're not applying this limit to the Medicare amount. We would simply write in 1,450. So if we, if this was $200,000, then we would be calculating 6.2% times the 168.6, because that would be based on the $200,000. Sorry. We would take the smaller of the 168.6, which in this case would be that. We would calculate 6.2% of this amount, which I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but I'm not going to refigure that. But this amount would then be calculated based on this. So it would actually be 2,900. So let's revert back to where we were previously. And basically, we add these amounts. This is the 7,650. Now, this is the amount of your additional tax. You would include this on Schedule 2, line 6, because if your employer didn't withhold this, then you have to pay it. Now, if your employer doesn't withhold this and you don't complete this form, then your Schedule SE, which is the that's the form where you would calculate your Social Security and Medicare tax, would force you into calculations that basically report both sides of that. You can't take a tax deduction for part of it, but still you're ending up basically paying almost twice as much for literally no benefit. So again, this is something that a lot of companies have been doing over the past decade, particularly with the gig economy. So think Uber Eats and all of these delivery apps. A lot of these force their employees to basically work as independent contractors. And there are some companies where they're trying to do the same thing. The Form SS8 allows the IRS to do an investigation, and basically they'll make their own determination based on the work conditions, the requirements of your job, and then they'll go through the applicable labor law and they'll make a determination. Hey, based on your relative amount of freedom that you have or don't have, if you're expected to wear a uniform, all of these things are taken into consideration before they make a determination on whether or not you're an employee or not. So again, the benefit is someone's going to have to pay the employer's share of the Social Security and Medicare tax. So if you truly think that you're an employee, you should file this form, include it with your tax return. So don't use this form, if you know for a fact that you actually are an independent contractor, you would report that income on Schedule C, and then you would calculate your self-employment tax on Schedule SE. And then if you are trying to calculate Social Security and Medicare on tips that you did not report to your employer, you would use IRS Form 4137. That's the form used to calculate taxes for Social Security and Medicare on unreported tip income. So, not a lot here, but there's a lot to process on the information required to put to go into this form. So, if you believe that you're an employee, if you have filed Form SS8 and you're waiting for that determination, you should file this form with your tax return. If you've received a determination or other correspondence or other evidence indicating that you're an employee and not an independent contractor, you should file this form. So I think that covers it for IRS Form 8919. We'll put links in the show notes to resources we've created on IRS Form 8919. We'll put a link to that article, which we recently updated, as well as all the other forms that we've discussed here. Form SS8, Schedule C, Schedule SE, the 1099, so on and so forth. So if you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. If you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, or if there's another topic that you'd like to see in an upcoming video, please hit me up in the comment section. Thank you very much and have a great day.